Responsive web design is all about media queries. A media query is a CSS code, so code you add to your CSS file, which can look like this. You simply add this in a new line in your CSS code and start with add media. This tells the browser that we have a media query here, meaning we want to gather information or query information about the media type, so the device type and its specifications, the person browsing our website is using. And if this device type meets certain criteria, then the code we define in this media query should be executed. These criteria are right here in this red part, either the min width or the max width, so either of the two. I'll dive into these in a few seconds, but the width here refers to the screen width, so basically the resolution of the screen the user's device has. And then we define such a min or max width. Right here, for example, I used a dummy value of 1200 pixels. This pixel value here refers to the device width, so the width of our screen where this media query becomes active. You are of course not limited to pixels here. You can also use em or rem. In the course, we'll mainly focus on to rem right here, because if the user adjusts the font size, then adjusting the breaking points according to this font size change typically makes a lot of sense. Once this criteria is fulfilled, as I said, we'll dive deeper into this max or min width in a few seconds, then certain CSS rules should be valid and executed. Here I added a single selector, the paragraph, just as an example, and inside this paragraph we only have the font size as property that we want to change in the media query. In practice, you can of course also add multiple selectors and multiple properties for the specific selectors in the media query. So that's the idea. You write the media query, you tell the browser at which device width this media query should be executed, and then, well, you add the code that should be executed if this query becomes active. Now, what about this min width and max width though? Well, min width and max width are again related to the desktop first or mobile first approach that we are using when creating the website. If you created a desktop first website like we did, we will use the max width keyword in here. Why the max width? Well, think about the logic we have when creating this website. We start with the large screen, with the desktop screen, and want to adjust our code downwards towards smaller device screens. This means starting from the current code base, we want to add certain breakpoints, which could for example be right here at 1200 pixels as defined above in the example. And if we are on a device with a maximum width of 1200 pixels or below, then the code defined in this media query should be executed. So in simple words, this means for large screens, I want to have a font size of 3 rem, for example. If the screen the user has is only at a maximum 1200 pixels wide, then 2 rem are sufficient for me. As I said, you can of course add different breakpoints and multiple CSS properties and values in there. You can also add multiple media queries. For example, we could set a second breakpoint for a maximum width of 768 pixels. So this means we again start from our current maximum screen width and say, okay, going down to a maximum width of 1200 pixels, I want to have certain rules to be applied. And if we go further down to 768 pixels, then I want to have another font size, 1.5 rem here, just to give you an example. So this is the max width keyword for the desktop first design. For mobile first, things are different. Here we use the min width. Again, because a different logic is applied right here. We created the code for our entire website mobile first. So we start from the smaller device and now want to adjust our code to make sure the page layout also looks good on bigger devices. Therefore, we tell our browser here with the min-width media query that once our screen hits a certain width, for example 768 pixels or more, then, well, a different font size, a different color, a different layout, whatever you can change, basically your entire CSS code should be applied. As for the desktop first design, also for mobile first with the min width, we can of course also add multiple breakpoints. Here, for example, again the breakpoint at 1200 pixels or more. But that's important to understand. In the desktop first example with max width, our breakpoints mean 1200 pixels or less, 768 pixels or less, so this is when this code is executed. For min width, we define that for 768 pixels and more, and for 1200 pixels and more, this code should be executed. So it's important to keep this difference in mind. What's also important is that the media query code is not something that replaces the existing CSS code. The code we write, so our code base, is still valid, but once the media query kicks in, just the rules, the properties defined in this media queries are added. This means if we defined a font size for the initial desktop website, and now we have a media query which takes place and changes the font size, then only this changed font size will become active. All other properties which are not mentioned in the media query are of course still executed and running as initially defined. With that, we are almost there to implement these media queries in our project. There is just one other thing I want to give you at hand to have it a bit easier when working with these media queries. You see these two breakpoints I defined as an example right here. And for these breakpoints, we have some common breakpoints for media queries that we can keep in mind. This is of course not a, well, only these breakpoints are the correct ones approach. These are just some common breakpoints which help you to dive into these queries. Typically, we can differentiate between portrait mode, so devices where the content is consumed in portrait mode, and landscape mode. Typical portrait devices are of course smartphones and partially tablets. Of course, tablets are also used to consume the content in landscape mode, but typically adding two breakpoints for smartphones and tablets makes a lot of sense. Here, for smartphones, we have a breakpoint of 480 pixels, and for tablets, we typically use 768 pixels. For landscape devices, we have three core examples. We have a notebook, a desktop computer, and of course the TV screen as the biggest device right here. There we also have three example widths in pixels which can be used. 1024 pixels for notebooks, 1200 pixels for desktop computers, and everything above 1200 pixels can be tailored towards TV screens. As I said, not the final breakpoint summary right here, but if you need some values at hand, then you can refer to this slide. That's the theory though. This is how responsive design works in theory and how media queries can be implemented. So let's go back to the project and see which media queries we might need right there.